So just like that, the season's over and clubs are already going to be thinking about what they can do in the summer transfer window. So I thought I'd make a video on one player that I think every club in the Premier League should look to sign this summer. So starting off with Arsenal, and I think there's a lot of areas that they should look to address in order to push City further and look to actually get over the line. But I've actually gone with central midfield as one of the areas that I think they need to strengthen most. I think a lot of their creativity came down from the right-hand side, and I think they lacked a little bit of fluidity on the left-hand side. So I think they need a number 8, an all-action, box-to-box midfielder, and I went with Newcastle's Bruno Guimaraes. I know there's been a lot of talk about him leaving Newcastle, and with the likes of Manchester City, PSG and Arsenal all linked. I think if you can get him from anywhere from 80 million, just anything below 100 million pretty much would be a fantastic signing. I think he's a great midfielder. It was him or a Douglas Luiz. I've gone with Bruno Guimaraes, and I think they could definitely look to attract him to the Emirates this summer. So next I've got Aston Villa, and I think it's going to be an interesting window. Obviously getting Champions League, brilliant through Unai Emery. I think a lot of it's going to be down to squad depth now that they're in Europe. And I think they could look to strengthen in defensive areas. And for me, I think I've looked at, their left-hand side, that left-back area. And I thought, who's a good left-back that's come onto the scene? And I thought of Ian Maatsen. I mean, Chelsea let him go. It would be an interesting one whether you think Chelsea would look to strengthen a rival for Europe. But I think Ian Maatsen would be a fantastic addition as a left back. He's done brilliantly getting Dortmund to the Champions League final. Another area could be maybe on the other side. Obviously you've got Konsa, you've got Matty Cash, but I think they could look to bring in more of a central defender / right back hybrid. And I've gone with Gertrude of Feyenoord, the Dutch 23-year-old. I think he could be a good addition for Villa. So there are a couple of positions that I think that they could look to strengthen, as it's going to be some season for them in the Champions League next year. So next we've got Brentford, and I think this summer it's going to be all about how they can look to replace Ivan Toney. Obviously, I think it's quite clear that they are going to lose him. He wasn't really featuring 100% in the end of last season, or the season that's just commenced. And I think, for me, I think they can be quite ambitious here, Brentford, and I think that they can look for Bologna's Joshua Zirkzee, formerly of Bayern Munich. I think it would be a really ambitious move. The young Dutchman, he can really put himself about, but he's also really technically gifted. And I think that would be a really shrewd acquisition if they could get him on the cheap. If they couldn't get him, then I think they could look to shop in the Premier League. And for me, Arsenal's Eddie Nketiah would be quite a shrewd acquisition. If they could get him anywhere between 25 million and 30 million, I think he'd perform really well at a club like Brentford or a mid-table club. I think he has proved he can get goals in the Premier League. And yeah, I think Arsenal would be looking to make a deal there. If not, I think maybe someone like Armando Broja from Chelsea. Obviously, Fulham got him on loan. He didn't really feature much, but he's quite a handful up there, and he could offer the same kind of hold-up play that an Ivan Toney did. So they're 3 players that I think that they could look to replace Ivan Toney with. Next up, we've got Bournemouth, another side who had a really good season last year, definitely overperforming all expectations. Areola was brilliant for them. In considering everyone was questioning why they got rid of Gary O'Neill, I think he's definitely silenced those doubters. And I think that they should look to bring in a more attacking player. And I've gone for Morgan Whittaker of Plymouth. He got 19 goals from the wing in the Championship last season, 3.6 shots per game. I've seen a lot of links with him and, maybe like a Spurs or someone, but I think Bournemouth could really look to get someone like this in. Shopping out the Championship is where a lot of these mid-table clubs go. And I think, he kept Plymouth up this year. And yeah, I think the 23-year-old Englishman would be a really good signing on the wing for Bournemouth. So next up, we've got Chelsea. And some season for Chelsea. A lot of the season they spent, around that 10th to 12th area. And they actually pushed on and got 6th place, which is, qualified them for Europe. And if City win the FA Cup, they could be in the Europa League. So I think areas they need to strengthen, it's going to be interesting. I actually think they'll have a very good season. I think they've got a lot of really talented players in that squad. But I think with Thiago Silva leaving, with there being a little bit of doubt over their central defenders, Badiashile, Disasi, Chalobah obviously been linked away from the move. I actually think that they should look to bring back someone like Mark Gahey. I think they've obviously got a buyback clause there, and he'd be a really, really good acquisition if they could bring him in to replace Thiago Silva. I was looking at that young central defender in Europe, and I was thinking, who can you really replace Thiago Silva with? And I think he has that kind of same build as Thiago Silva. He's quite short, stocky, great on the ball, a leader, and of course he knows Chelsea. He was there in the academy. Another option could be Ousmane Diomande, but I think Marc Guéhi would be more of a smart acquisition just because he knows the league. Obviously, he spent most of last season out with injury, but there's no doubt in the England international, he'd be a great player for Chelsea, I think. Next up, we've got Crystal Palace, and obviously, what an end to the season for Oliver Glasner. Really came in and steered the ship. They got 10th place in the end, which is fantastic. I think this season, this summer, it's going to be interesting to see whether they can keep a lot of their talent. Obviously, the likes of Eze, Michael Elise, and Marc Guéhi, who we just previously mentioned. But I actually think that they should look to bring in a winger, and of course, Palace are a club that find a lot of their talent in the Championship, and I think that they should go for Philogene from Hull City. I think he showed his talent in this most recent season, some unbelievable goals. So I think Philogene from Hull City would be a really direct winger on the left. I also think a more ambitious signing, I'm not sure whether it'll be able to happen because Leeds are obviously looking like they might come up in the playoff final, but Somerville is another player who I think that Palace could attract. He's got incredible potential, the Dutch winger, and he's been linked to some really big moves, but if Palace could get him, what a coup that would be. So next up, we've got Fulham, and I think again it's going to be whether they can keep hold of the likes of João Palhinha. It looks like Tosin is going to go to Newcastle on a free transfer, so replacing him is going to be quite difficult because he's obviously a really big presence at the back for them. But I've actually gone with Kevin Danso of Lens, and I watched him for Lens against Arsenal in the Champions League, and he's a really commanding figure at the back. The Austrian international, formerly of Southampton, he's got experience in the country, so I think that would be a really good move for Fulham. Of course, if they do lose João Palhinha, then they'll want to bring in a defensive midfielder replacement, but as of now, I'm going to go Kevin Danso. Next up, we've got Ipswich, and I think it's an interesting one with Ipswich because obviously they're coming up. They're probably going to be shopping in the loan market a little bit and looking to replace someone like an Amari Hutchinson. If they can keep Amari Hutchinson, that'd be brilliant. But if not, I think that they would probably be looking at some big six fringe players, likes of Reece Nelson, maybe a James McAtee, who's obviously going to leave Sheffield United. But if not, I do think that they should look at someone like Flynn Downs. Obviously, he was at Ipswich for a lot of his career in his young days, and I watched him the other day in the playoff semi-final. He was by far the best player on the pitch, so he's made a massive difference for Southampton. And if Southampton don't come up, I think Ipswich could be there, looking to get him on loan, maybe from West Ham, or trying to bring him in on a permanent. So next up, we've got Brighton, and I think it's going to be a bit of a weird summer for Brighton because I don't think a lot of them anticipated that Roberto De Zerbi would go. He announced the day before their last game of the season, which was a bit of a strange one, but I do think I've seen links before. I think David Ornstein linked them to Kieran Dewsbury Hall, and I think that would be a really good one. Offers unbelievable creativity. Obviously, one of the leading players in the Championship last season. It's an ambitious move because obviously Leicester are coming up, and they might think, how are we going to, lure him away from Leicester? But I saw obviously Leicester have got financial doubts going into this new season. They're talking about a point deduction, so I think that he'd be a good move for Brighton. If not, maybe an Angel Gomez from Lille. I think he's been going under the radar there since his move abroad, so that would be another one that I think Brighton could get over the line. So next up, we've got Newcastle, and I think it's been an interesting season for them, to say the least. There's a lot of talk that they are going to have to sell players because they're financial fair play, but I do think they should look to strengthen on their right-hand side. Obviously, they've got Miguel Alma on there. I just think maybe that's an area that they could look to upgrade on. And there was two names I had in mind. One was a little bit more ambitious than the other, and that was Michael Elise. Now, I'm not sure if they'd be able to pull this one off. Obviously, he's been linked with the likes of Man United, Chelsea, a lot of big clubs after him. Just an incredible player. But if Newcastle could maybe just tempt them with that 60 million release clause, I think it would be a brilliant acquisition for Newcastle. If not, I do think that they could look at Kubo from Real Sociedad. I think that's. I was actually going to put Kubo in with Spurs, because I thought Ange Postecoglou does have those Japanese links, obviously with his time in Japan. But I do think Newcastle could look to bring Kubo in. He's a really tricky winger on the right. Obviously, he's got big club experience. You know, he came through at Barcelona and Real Madrid. So I think that could be another player that could definitely strengthen Newcastle and look to improve next season and maybe push back into the top 4. So just off the back of that, we have got Tottenham. And I think, again, Tottenham are going to be looking in a similar market to Newcastle. They finished 5th Europa League. They're deemed that a good season in their first season under Ange Postecoglou. And I think they'll be looking for a direct winger, to be honest. I think for them, it's just about getting someone who can cover on the left and the right. Obviously, Heung-min Son's not had the greatest of seasons for his standards. Kulusevski as well on the wing. So I've gone with Antonio Nusa of Club Brugge. I think that could be... There's previous links there. Obviously, he's moved to Brentford, broke down, and to Spurs, in fact. And he's only 18 years old. I think he's got a lot of potential. Norwegian international. If not, I do think that they could look at someone like maybe a Pedro Neto. A lot of that will depend on whether they can keep him fit. Obviously, he did struggle with his injuries at Wolves this season. But if they can get him on a good deal, because I know Wolves are obviously going to be forced to sell as well. So many clubs that are struggling with, profit sustainability rules. But yeah, they're areas that I think that Tottenham should look to address. So next up, we've got Liverpool. And I think for Arne Slot, he'll be looking to bring in a defender, specifically a left-footed defender, because I think obviously they've got the likes of Van Dijk, Ibrahima Konate, Matip was out for the whole season. So I think, and obviously you've got the injury concerns with Andy Robertson. So I think they'll be looking to bring in almost a left-sided central defender who can maybe cover left fullback. And I've gone with Nico Schlotterberg, and I've just been absolutely in awe of him in this Champions League campaign for Dortmund. I think he's been brilliant for them. He's only 23 years old. He's been there, Dortmund, for 2 seasons now. I think if you can get him for anywhere less than 60 million, I think that would be a brilliant signing. Of course, defensive midfield is another area where Liverpool might need to strengthen. And I've gone for Mats Wiffer there from Feyenoord. I think he's starting to really cement his position in Europe's elite now. I mean, he's one of the best defensive midfielders in Europe statistically. So he'd be, and of course Arne Slot will know all about him, coming from Feyenoord himself. If not, maybe a João Palhinha. Obviously his move broke down to Bayern. There's no secret that he was looking at a move away from Fulham in last summer. So maybe Liverpool look to strengthen there. It'll be interesting to see what kind of defensive midfielder they do go for, because whether it's a ball winner or a progressor, I do think Arne Slot will look to address those areas this summer. Next up, we've got Man City, and I think it's going to be an interesting one. Obviously 4 titles in a row, absolute juggernaut, but where I think they could look to strengthen is maybe just like preparing for the likes of Bernardo Silva and De Bruyne, who are on the older side now. Might be looking to move them on. I'm not sure yet if they'd be looking to get rid of De Bruyne, but definitely Bernardo Silva. There's no secret that he's been linked with moves away. So I've gone with a creator, and I think it would be a really interesting move, because obviously they were linked with Lucas Paqueta, but I've actually gone with Jamal Musiala, because I think he's an incredible player. I think again, another player I think we should look out for in the Euros. If they could get him, it would definitely be a 9-figure transfer, but what a signing that would be if they could get Musiala from Bayern Munich. Next up, we've got United, and obviously United have got so many areas that they need to strengthen, and I'm sure there'll be a number of names that they're linked with this summer. Not the greatest season, of course, and they've not qualified for Europe at all unless they win the FA Cup. I've gone for central defence because I think, obviously, end of the season, we've seen Casemiro filling in there. Varane's off. Varane's announced that he's leaving at the end of the season. Johnny Evans has had to fill in. So I've gone with Antonio Silva of Benfica, because I watched him in a few games. It was a Portugal international friendly, and I watched him and I was thinking, there's no way that this guy's 19, 20 years old. He's just got incredible aura back there. Like he's brilliant on the ball. He's build up. He's incredible. But he's also like 6'4", just an incredible presence back there, and I think it would definitely be an expensive transfer, but he would be one that would, you know, him and Lisandro Martinez would probably be that partnership for years to come. So yeah, I think that should definitely be an area that they look to address. If not, obviously midfield, another key area. I mean, just no legs in midfield this season really for United. There's been such a dysfunction in their midfield, and yeah, I think with Casemiro and looking likely to leave, and Amrabat as well, maybe they should also look for, you know, a Matt Swiffer. Yeah, I think United have got a big job on their hands this summer, so there are a couple players that I think that they should look to bring in. Next up, we've got West Ham, and obviously a new manager coming in, looking like it's Julian Lopetegui. Of course, you know, Lucas Paqueta is a lot of it's going to be determined on whether they can keep him. He was linked with Man City heavily last season. If he does go, I think they should look to replace him with Morgan Gibbs-White. I think that would be a good like-for-like signing. If not, I think they should bring in a number 9, and it would probably have to be Santiago Jimenez from Feyenoord. He got 23 goals in the Eredivisie this season, 2 goals in the Champions League and 1 in the Europa League. So I think, you know, he's one of the best number 9s in the market in Europe right now for his age, and he'd be a brilliant acquisition. Next up, we've got Nottingham Forest, and obviously it was a difficult season for them with their points deductions. Another club that are going to be struggling financially. So I think they should look for a smart signing. And I think with Ross Barkley going down with Luton, they should definitely look to bring him in. I can see them having to sell, and Morgan Gibbs-White might be a player that they need to replace if he does leave. And Ross Barkley's been one of the best players in the league this year, really. For Luton, it's just been such a turnaround for him since, obviously, he struggled in his Chelsea days. But I think if they can look to get him on the cheap, then that could definitely be an area where they could look to address in terms of like their creativity. Next up, we've got the newly promoted Leicester, and of course this is going to depend on whether they can bring in Fatawu on a permanent. But if not, I do think they should look to shop in the Championship as well. And for me, it's Jack Clarke from Sunderland. I think he could be an area where they should address. I think he reminds me almost of a Jack Grealish when he was at Villa. He's just a brilliant ball carrier from out wide, definitely one of the best players in the Championship, and it would be difficult for Sunderland to keep him, to be honest, because yeah, I mean, he's definitely a player that's born for the Premier League. He's definitely too good for the Championship. So yeah, Leicester, Jack Clarke. Next up, we've got Everton. Obviously stayed up pretty convincingly at the end, and it's a difficult one really. They'll be shopping in a lower budget market. They haven't really got much money to spend, so I think they're going to have to look at some smart signings this summer. And for me, a lot of it's going to depend on whether this player can actually go up himself. He's been in the playoff final, and that's Kyle Walker-Peters. If he does come up, it might be a difficult one to pull off. He's got great versatility. He can play both sides, fullback. He's got Premier League experience. I think they might be looking to get rid of Ashley Young. He looked a little bit out of his depth at the end of the season. So yeah, I've gone Kyle Walker-Peters just because I think he'll offer great versatility, and he's got experience in the league as well. And lastly, we've got Wolves, and for me, again, they'll be looking to sell a lot of their players. Pedro Neto, the one that's obviously the most notable, and replacing him will be some feat, because yeah, I mean, he's their best player. He's been out for a lot of it, so they have had to prepare for what life's going to be like without him. But I've gone for a direct winger who I think can do a good job at replacing him in the long term as well. And that's Wilson Odobert from Burnley. Obviously, Burnley being relegated, so a lot of their good players are probably gonna move away. And I think Wilson Odobert is definitely a signing that would add a lot of directness in their game. 1.8 dribbles per game. He's only 19 years old, the Frenchman, and whenever I watched Burnley, he was more of a standout player. They didn't have much going forward. But yeah, he was probably one of the best players for Vincent Kompany's side. Okay, so that was every team in the league's smart signing this summer. Let me know if you think I've missed anyone in the comments. Make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.